Domingo. My son Benjamin is going to Lehigh, and he's in a program called Ideas, interdisciplinary degree in engineering and arts and science. So it's kind of an unusual opportunity. I also have a son who's graduating from
This is my first and last time through this process. She is going to Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and she thinks she wants to study neuroscience.
I'm Stephen Kaminsky, and my daughter is Corey Kaminsky, and she's going to Cornell probably to study chemistry. I have an oldest son who graduated here 2 years ago who's also at Cornell, and so this is my second time, and I will be doing this a third time.
Hi, my name is Fiona Payne, and my daughter's name is Angela Lee, and she's going to University of Chicago, and she's going to study economics and history. And this is our first time to do a college process, and this is my only daughter, so this is my last time too.
Hi, my name is Jessica Friedman. My son is Aaron Wander. He's going to Princeton, and he wants to study international relations. This is my first time, and in 4 years I'll be doing it all over again.
So we have 2 second-time parents, and Andrea with twins. So that's a couple of complications there. Also, early decision, early action.
Early decision.
Yeah, and
Early action.
And everybody else is ready.
Early action.
What I'd like to know is, when did the college process start for your family? And was it do you think that was the right time? Were you comfortable with the time that you started? And who drove the process, you or your child? Peggy?
The process for Michelle started for her really mostly in her junior year. There was a lot of back and forth. She's a very compliant child, but she had the advantage, or disadvantage you could say, of having seen a few schools when she was in 8th grade, only because she got dragged on a few of those trips. Mostly not, but a few. And I think that there was a lot of discussion during the course of the process. She narrowed it down, and she worked very hard with her counselor as well to talk about what she was interested in. But she went into it with a pretty good idea that she thought she wanted a small school. She ended up at a little bit larger school than she originally thought she might be. She was a small number line school, had them on her list, and ultimately ended up at a small, very small university, but with a little line school.
There was a meeting, guidance council meeting, and I think it was the end of 10th grade, where the guidance counselor for the grade talked about the FISC guide. And it was right after that we went out and bought the FISC guide and started each of us tabbing with different colors what schools we thought were right and interesting for each of the boys and for themselves. And so then in the fall of junior year is when we started to look at schools. In October, vacate, whatever that was, Columbus Day weekend, and then the various holidays. So that's when we started, and it kept going. We had 2 students going with different interests, so we covered a lot of schools. And they drove the process in terms of which schools we would be looking at. I pushed so that we made sure we did get to schools, and we thought about when we were going to look at them, and to make sure that they saw different kinds of schools as well. But they really drove the process themselves in terms of where they wanted to focus.
I had 5 different friends tell me that they thought that Colorado College would be a good fit for my daughter. I'd never heard of it before, and none of them knew each other. So when we decided to go skiing in her sophomore year, we figured that was going to and she looked up more on the information than before, and she rolled her eyes and very uncomfortable during the entire time. And about halfway through the tour, she gave me that big sigh and that look, and she said, "Mom," and I thought, okay, well, we're leaving lunch early. And she said they couldn't have written a better place for me. And she fell in love with it. She said it felt like camp to her, it felt like home, and, we thought, all right, well, it's the first school you're seeing. And the next year, when junior year came around, we started the process of looking through the FISC guide. We voted also after that meeting in sophomore year. We went through it a little bit differently. We went through it state by state. We took a state every couple of weeks and just ruled out a whole bunch of things that were definite no's, single-sex schools, all that kind of stuff that we knew would definitely not be comfortable for her. And we went back to visit schools. Columbus Day weekend of junior year, we'd do the Boston schools, and another weekend we'd do the Philadelphia schools. And we tried to see as many things as possible, because we heard from other parents that the more you visited, the more it would resonate with your child. So we tried to do that, and that really worked for us. We went back to Colorado. That was 180 degrees different. She ended up in Colorado. So.
Stephen, when did it start for your family?
The SATs sort of kick-started my daughter into doing something. And she studied for the SATs, and I don't think it really sort of snowballed from that until the later fall, where she decided she wanted to look at a couple of schools. She drove the process. We didn't push her very hard on that. I'm not a big supporter of doing schools ahead of time. Different approaches. My big fear is that you go to a school and you really get turned on at the school because you happen to get a good tour guide that day. And I don't mean that facetiously. I think that kids are very easily fooled by a couple of individuals they might meet at a particular school that really turn them on, and that's not necessarily representative. We learned that after the fact. They're going to look at the two schools that she was trying to decide between. And one school was, she ended up not going. Really was apparent that they were selling. They were selling. She wanted to people to wow around, and you have to come here. And I think that was looked at as a huge thing. The school she ended up going to was sort of the opposite. She went there and as we said, if you're coming here to have a good time, you're going to the wrong place, don't come here. If you're coming here to be pre-medi, don't come here. It's the exact opposite, that turned around. But she, like my son, really needed to see one school to help them frame the questions that were important to them. It didn't matter whether it was a school that they were excited by or a school that they weren't. It just helped them figure out what were the questions that were important to ask about what they were looking for in school. And so she looked at two schools and then was off and running, looking on the web and trying to figure out what were the parameters that she would try to evaluate in each of the various schools that were out there. And she had some pretty narrow issues. She wanted to be in the Northeast. She wanted to be in a town that had mass transit, but she didn't want to drive. And after the SATs, slowly gathered steam and then disappeared again over the summer. And then in the fall of senior year is really when everything started to happen. And I'm not sure I would recommend the summer being a time when you stop, but I would really, really strongly urge the essay issues to really get focused on the essay in the spring of junior year, because there's a lot of work that goes into that, a lot of rewrites, and it's painful. And you may have a lot of battles like we did about what should be in there.
I know you have some really good ideas and opinions about that. We'll come back to the essay today. Fiona, when did your daughter and you get started?
My daughter started to visit University of Chicago after her sophomore, 10th grade, that summer. So she stopped by there and then she fell in love with the school. And also at Hunter, she joined the Federal Reserve Challenge Club. So over there she learned economics with Mrs. Curtis. So she learned about the University of Chicago economics systems a lot. So she likes that. Mm-hmm. That's why she said she wanted to go there.
I think, Fiona, you told me that you helped her and got her to agree, basically, to do some programs in the summer after her maybe 9th grade and 10th grade years. So would you say the college process began with those commitments?
After 8th grade, I signed her up with the CTY summer program, so she went there. But she didn't like it, so next year she doesn't want to go back. And then 9th grade, I signed her up with the Brown University summer program with the economics. One of the class she chose was financial something. I forgot. So anyway, after that she didn't like Brown, so she said she would never go back there. And then after that, she doesn't want to join any summer program I pick for her.
So that's where the road diverged there. Jessica?
So after that, she just took over all the process by herself. She doesn't want to listen to my advice anymore.
I would say that the process started for us in January of junior year because he decided he was going to take the SAT in March and we needed to pick a review class. And this was a huge big deal because he was captain of the wrestling team and gosh, he couldn't miss any wrestling. So it had to be on, and we're Sabbath observers, so we had to find a class on Sunday. I could tell you that he missed, for the $800 we paid, he missed at least half of those anyway for wrestling competitions. But that's when it started. And then over February break of junior year, I said, look, we're going to start looking at colleges because you've got to start somewhere. And I knew that he was going to be away all summer, so summer visits weren't an option. So February vacation, we started out on a trip where I said, look, I'm going to take you to 3 different kinds of schools, just to give you a frame of reference. And we went to visit Harvard, which is in a city, and we had a cousin there. And then we were going to head to 2 other, Amherst is a small school with a lot of other schools. Near it, and Williams is a small school. Unfortunately, the day after we visited Harvard, he got really ill, and we spent the entire day in the Mass General emergency room, and then we just went home. So make sure you leave extra time for other schools and your trips. They may not work out. Anyway, after that, I pushed him to do a couple of more trips. I got his dad to do some visits. And also, at the same time in English class, they were working on an essay that they might use for the Common App. So he was thinking in those terms. I will say that the trip in February was useful because at Harvard we ran into some other kids. And my son realized that, for the first time, he realized it's not just my neurotic mother making me think about this. Other people are doing this too. And that was really very helpful. I drove a lot of the process. Initially, we asked the guidance counselor for a list of schools, and that helped us get started. But getting him to actually say, okay, I'll go with you to the schools, getting him to think about what he wanted and all that, was a little harder. We ended up hiring a private college counselor because his counselor left at the very last minute, right before he ended junior year, and I worked with her. But I would have to say I drove the process, although the final list was definitely his.
So, Jessica, did anyone else use a private counselor? So you're the only one. Were you satisfied with that, Jessica? Was that a valuable experience for you?
Using the counselor?
Yes.
Let me just say that I was initially completely opposed to the idea. I had people, a couple of other older parents telling me, you really need a counselor, you really need a counselor. I said, absolutely not. We really liked Ms. Hartman, his counselor. I thought it was an elitist thing to do. But when Ms. Hartman left, I was not going to leave my kid to a counselor who didn't know Hunter, didn't know him. At the end of the day, the counselor was helpful in 3 respects. She helped us come up with a list. She met with us for 3 hours. She asked him a lot of questions. I don't know how many questions his counselor here asked him. I just don't know. So maybe it was the same, maybe it wasn't. But she really knew him at the end of the process. She helped us decide that essay that he had been working on in English class, it was about a big soccer game. He was captain of the camp soccer team, and it was a heartbreaker, and they lost. And it was really well written, but she said, don't use that essay. They get thousands of essays about the big game, and you want to pick something different. And that right there was worth the price of admission. The third thing she did was help me push him along. I mean, a deadline could be coming up, and I'd be saying, come on, Aaron, this essay's due in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And I'd email Deb, and I'd say, could you do me a favor? Could you ask him how this essay is coming? And that would help move him along. And that was very valuable. Aaron is a really good kid, but somehow in this process, I think this process reduces even the best kids to nervous kids, and that can come in the form of resistance.
Okay, a couple of nuts and bolts things. A lot of parents are curious about standardized testing. I think everybody but Michelle took the SAT, is that right? Show of hands, who did test prep? Did everybody's child do test prep? Donnie, she did not, no. Your daughter did take the SAT, but she...
I don't think it was test prep.
You know. Stephen, you have a thought about that as well?
Well, my daughter took test prep just for the parts that she felt she was weak in. She's pretty strong in math. And I'm under the impression that you can't really learn academic information to do well on these tests, but you do learn tricks and things to do well on these questions. There are some real valuable tricks that can get you through the multiple choice, and also there's some things you can use for figuring out how to go through the answers to paragraph reading and that kind of thing. So she did that. It made a huge difference for the SATs. And the rest of it, I think, was just she knew the information she needed to know to do well in that. So she got really practice.
Peggy, your daughter took just the ACT, and why did she make that choice?
She had taken the PSAT and the plan, which is the, for lack of a better explanation, the plan is the PSAT of the ACT, which they started offering here about 4 years ago. It's optional, but it's a really good option. And she felt more comfortable with the ACT, so we went that route. She took it 3 times. The third time was really almost like a fluke. The second time she took it, there were some problems at the test center, and so the ACT organization offered her an opportunity to retake the test. So it didn't cost anything. There was really no downside. She didn't prepare for it, but it was just, there had been some glitches, and that was just their way of saying we're sorry. And she did work with somebody privately in terms of test prep. I do believe it helped, but I think one of the things it really did was it boosted her confidence, so she knew when she was going in what she had to do. And that in and of itself helped her throughout the entire process, even when she sat down to write an essay for for her application. Just she was confident in what she was doing.
And the ACT tests core knowledge more than...
Core knowledge includes science, so one advantage of the ACT, or you might not think this is an advantage, but most schools, and not all, and it changes every year, so don't listen to parents who just went through this year. It will change by next year, but most schools do not require subject tests if you take the ACT with writing. It's like 6 or 7 that still do, but by next year, that could change. We don't know, so just keep checking the website.
Why did your daughter take both?
When she did the plan and when she did the PSAT, she had comparable scores. So she just figured she'd take one of each, whichever one worked better would be great. Also to avoid taking the subject tests.
And so she took each of those tests once.
She took the ACT once and she took the SAT twice.
More than one time for everybody else on the SAT? Yeah, twice. And usually, did everybody start in March of the junior year? Seems to me.
May.
Okay. Parents did have a lot of questions about those kinds of specifics. We should touch... the subject tests.
The reason I said it is Aaron took the Chem SAT2 in the spring of his sophomore year.
Yeah.
So that started also, I guess, that started the process, but that also got one test out of the way while it was in.
So generally, kids have to present 2, I believe, 2 subject tests is the most common.
I think for Cornell, you had to do 3, and one of them was math.
Yeah.
So we knew he was going to apply there, so we started that.
Yeah, my daughter took 4 SAT too.
4 SAT
Yes.
tests.
English literature, U.S. history, world history, and math level 2.
And generally, you take them at the end of the course that you are studying, so you can really take them anytime. No?
I found that there's one trick, it's not really a trick, but it's an advantage, is to take the test in your junior year early enough so that you get the result in time to register and take it again if you want to do that, so you don't end up having to study over the summer to take it in the fall. That's an advantage, because you really don't want to have your kids study over the summer.
Okay, great. Another one we've touched on some is the essay. and I'd say that's probably a really big thing for everyone's application. What role did you all play in that? Some of you have already addressed that. Anybody want to contribute? Andrea?
I played absolutely no role in the essay that my children submitted in their college applications. They would not even let me read them. They did them in class. Both schools had, in first semester of senior year, focusing on the essay specifically to get a good essay for the college application. They tweaked it, they worked with it. They wouldn't even, I never saw it officially, I never saw it.
Anybody else? Peggy?
I was slightly different, of course. Michelle took in the spring of junior year, they were asked to write an essay that could possibly be a college essay, and in her case, it ended up being her college essay. So she worked on it over the summer. That was really the only thing that she did over the summer, and it was at the end of the summer because she was away for the first half. But sort of the end of the summer when she worked on it while she was in preseason for soccer, because to her, when preseason started, school started. And we have a friend who had offered to help our son, and she helped 5 kids that year in the class at Hunter, and all of them got into their ED schools except my son, who she didn't help. So this time around, she said, you don't have a choice, I'm going to help Michelle. And she's a professional writer, and so she helped her edit a little bit. And there were things that she said that Michelle didn't do, but there were things that Michelle said, that she lived where she listened to her friend. And I was able to read the essay during the course of the revision process as well.
Donna, you had an experience with help there.
My kid's a procrastinator, so all summer I wrote her about, you got to start this, at least start brainstorming, and she didn't, of course. And sometime after Labor Day, I realized that I had purchased from another high school's auction 3 sessions with a writer who said that help your kid with their college essay, and I figured this would probably be a good thing because although my daughter really likes to have me look at her writing, I'm super critical, and it probably wasn't going to be the best dynamic on the college essay because I wanted this to continue to be fun since it had been fun up until this point for us. So she met with this woman, she went to the apartment, they had a lovely conversation, 3 hours of talking. They seemed to have hit upon a subject that would be good college essay material. And then Emily came back and tried to write that essay and realized that it made her sound like a real, prissy prig. And she really didn't want to write that essay, so she decided on a different topic, which was, something meaningful to her. She said, it's really hard to come up with these essays. She said, I'm 17 years old, Mom. She said, I haven't lived long enough to have, these meaningful aha moments. She said, and I've written, how many memoirs have I read, had to write since I was in 2nd grade. She said, they just all sound so boring, fishing with Dad, doing it. But she had had an experience a couple of summers before, which really kind of helped her define who she is and what kind of person she believes she'll be as an adult. And although it wasn't a great story, it was a good moment for her, and she could speak to it from her heart. So she wrote this essay, and she sent it back to this woman who she'd had the meeting with. And the woman wrote back one line and said, are you sure you want to write about this? At which point, my daughter said, I don't really care what she says, Mom. If it doesn't bother you, I really want to write about this. And I said, go for it. And so she wrote the essay, and it was too long, and I really didn't want to be the person to edit it, so she went to Miss Refkin, the chair of the English department here, who was kind enough to spend about 15 minutes with her and point out to Emily saying, here's where here's some places where you can tighten this up, here's where you can fix that up a little bit, and she made some changes, and she showed it to me right before she hit the send button, and as much as I wanted to make more corrections, including that preposition at the end of a sentence and a couple of other things that really bothered me, I figured, let it be from her. She's either going to get in or not on her own recognizance and her own voice, and she'll land where she's meant to be.
Jessica, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm the complete opposite of Andrea, and I've helped, I would say I've helped my son with papers all through high school, but I've critiqued them. What are you trying to say here? Your quote doesn't support your conclusion. You already said this, that kind of thing. And I decided that now is not the greatest time to stop doing that. And he lets me see his papers, so there wasn't that kind of resistance. But what I found was that he's a pretty good writer. English, not so much. Nonfiction, yes. But I found that this process reduces even a pretty articulate and sometimes passionate kid to a robot. And I also found that sometimes you could write a really beautiful essay, but it didn't respond to the prompt. So, for example, Princeton had an essay. It had, on top of the Common App, it has a choice of 6, and the only topic that remotely appealed to him was somebody who influenced you. So he wrote about, I know this is going to sound completely corny and made up, but it's true. This little old lady from our synagogue, I used to make him go over and talk to her every Shabbat, and long story short, he realized seriously from that sometimes just a little word, a little time with someone can cheer them up or make them a little happy. So he wrote this beautiful essay about this old lady. And the first line of this, I have to say, was something like, the person who's influenced me the most is a little old lady who doesn't know who I am anymore because she has dementia. And anyway, it was a beautiful essay, and I said, Aaron, this is really beautiful, but they also want to know, how did she influence you? So he had to change it. I mean, because I don't know how they read these essays, but I think they expect you to respond to the prompt. And then there was another essay with Amherst, and there's something he wrote about being a dinosaur, and that was very creative and really cool, but again, I said, but I don't remember the prompt. It didn't respond to the prompt. So I thought, I am not at all sorry that I critiqued the essays, and I put them through a lot. But at the end of the day, I think it was helpful.
Now, Fiona, your daughter, going to Chicago, their application is legendary for their essays, but she has some pretty strong feelings about the essays, and you too.
Well, of course, my daughter will not let me read her essays because she doesn't trust my English to try not to read her English. So she asked her best friend to proofreading her essays. For Chicago, they have a lot of strange essays titled. One she picked is Find X. So she looked at the title, she said, oh, so I know I'm going to get in. I said, why? And she said, oh, I'm a strange person. I know I can write this. So she wrote it much shorter than the requirement, she told me afterwards. And then the other two are optional, so she finished everything they asked her to write. And those two, she said, is much longer than the requirement. So she said, I don't know. And then later on, she called them up and then tell them, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know how many words you need maximum. So I didn't, maybe I made mistakes. So they said, oh, okay, that's fine. But for the Yale essay, she made a mistake. She wrote an essay, it says 500 characters, but she thinks 500 words. So she wrote an essay, and then at the end of the night, the last minute, she typed it in, and then keep telling her it's not good, because she exceed the space. Because the 500 characters, including punctuations and everything, is space. So she had to rewrite everything at the last minute.
So that's a trap to avoid. And Stephen, you had a good argument that you used to ask Corey to show you her essay.
Yeah, I'm not sure it was work, but I think you're referring to the perspective that our kids are 17 or 18 and they're writing essays from a 17 or 18-year-old perspective, but they're not realizing that the person in the admissions office is going to be closer to my age and is going to read something different than the way it was written. And so I think that's a good argument to your kids to let you look at what they've written to make sure that it rings the way they want it to ring. Because you can then interpret what you read, say it back to them, and ask them if that's really what they intended to say. It's a little bit difficult to comment on essays because unlike the grades in your SAT, where you can look up on the web and see what it takes to get into the school and that school, there's no feedback that comes back to you that says these are the kinds of essays that work and these are the kinds that don't work. Other than when you go to the school visits, most of the admissions directors that give the presentations will basically say, certainly don't use when you steal off the wall, because they can tell you. And don't guide your kids too much because they want to hear your kids speak from their heart. They want to know what drives your kids. They want to know what their passion is. And they also want to know, and this is the tough part, how that passion fits into that particular academic institution. institution, and that doesn't really work really well when you do the Common App and writing one essay per private institution. You sort of have to fit in your way around that. The last thing that I always said to my kids, no matter what essay they were writing for, whether it's given to Hunter or whatever they were, was that you got to remember that they're going to read hundreds of these essays. And so somewhere in that essay, put in something, or throughout the essay, put in something that makes it fun to read, makes it enjoyable for the person who's reading it, so that when they're done, they actually enjoy the process and you were different than the others because they liked it. Not necessarily because you were more articulate or you were more intelligent. When somebody likes you, it's really hard to set aside the fact they like you when it comes to being objective and grading. So you can be funny or clever or do something that grabs their attention. I think that's a plus. And again, there's no way to look at that and measure it and say working on it. That's my suggestion.
Thank you all. Now, a couple of things I'd like to cover kind of briefly. You've all mentioned them a little bit. Everybody is going to school. It takes a lot of time. Most of you used every vacation in the junior year and sometimes in the summer. How vital is it, and what value did that have in the process, and how much did you drive that? Literally, I know, taking you through, as you said.
We visited a number of schools. I personally think if you have the time and the means to do it, it's really important. One of the, Hunter has a limit of 8 private institutions and unlimited public, and I know that, and international. And that number actually is larger than it was like 5 years ago. But as a result, it sort of requires you to narrow your list to schools that you really want to go to, because I told both our children, you have every school on your list, you have to be willing to go, because it might be the only one that you get into. So I viewed the trips in a couple of ways. It was information gathering. It was a chance to see your kids in a different environment. It was a bonding experience. Some days it was a driving lesson. And I found that the most important thing, there were a couple of things, but the most important thing that I did is I listened. Because Michelle's opinion of a school would be different on Tuesday than it was on Wednesday, than it was on Thursday, than it might be 3 weeks later. With the possible exception of Johns Hopkins, which was always like the school that she wanted to go to from the moment that she saw it, for whatever reason. And sometimes it's just a gut feel. So.
We saw a lot of schools. Clearly you have 2 kids and they don't know really, one knew what he wanted, so Ben wanted engineering. We went to a lot of schools that have engineering programs, and there's a lot of different types of engineering programs. So we started to eliminate schools. We didn't, after seeing MIT and Cornell, we didn't want just engineering. We wanted an opportunity that Lehigh or Dartmouth would offer where you could actually study some liberal arts and continue his interests in other subjects. But we went to a lot of schools, and they saw schools that they weren't interested in because they went with, we had both of them going at the same time. But in the end, Charlie is going to Northwestern, and we didn't see Northwestern until after he was accepted, after they were both accepted. And he's thrilled, and he loves, the idea of the school, and it was, it turned around with that visit after acceptance. And those visits that you go to when your children are accepted, because we did go to several of those that they got accepted, it's a whole different feeling than when you go as a prospective student. I think that, while we went to a lot, and it was good to see, and I made them sort of trips, we went down to UVA, and we went to Monticello, and, you added some fun into it. After a while, you could recite, as a parent, you personally can recite the admissions director's speech, and if you're not paying attention, you forget one school to the next. They all sound the same. They look different, so take pictures, but they sound exactly the same. When we went to a couple of different schools, we went to 3 accepted program schools, accepted students programs in April. Then we really got nuances for each of the schools. At least that was what I felt. That you were being sold at that point in a different way because they knew that you were accepted and they were hoping you choose them, as opposed to us hoping they choose us in the prior course. So I thought that was actually better. And so maybe if I like to do it again a little less on up front, and it's okay to wait till that.
Tony, you saw millions, right?
It's a lot of schools. We saw probably, I don't know, 24 schools. She didn't apply to all of them, and those trips really helped us knock out some of them. When you're looking at a lot of small liberal arts schools, on paper they all look the same. On their websites, they all look the same. You know, their catalogs all look the same. Their blogs all the same. You've really got to go there and kind of get a feel for it. Even if that means that you get the great tour guide or the really crappy tour guide. And that's what the fun is all about, like discussing how much it is. Like, okay, well, let's look at the school and how that goes. You know, or that's like I was really cute, Emily. And, you know, but we did have to try the food at every school because that was really, really important to my child because she lives on her stomach. But she's shy, and I'm a motor mouth. And so she was very, very appreciative of the fact that I was driving the questions. And no matter what group we were in, I probably asked 4 times as many questions as any other parent or student there. And, you know, the tour guides actually seemed to appreciate it because there was a lot of dead air otherwise. And I asked every question that there was. I mean, I asked the sex, drugs, and rock and roll questions. I asked the, you know, the academic questions. I asked everything, everything. And as the tours went on, I asked more and more and more and more. And Emily's friends started wanting to come on the tours because they said that I was the only one who was asking questions and their parents didn't know what to ask. So I started to write them all down for my friends, and that was really helpful. When we saw schools after she'd been admitted, we narrowed it down to 4 schools and went to 4 admitted students program things. And it was very different, and that really, really, really helped. In terms of making the decision, because then you really weren't being affected by your tour guides. You were listening to the academic presentations, and you were really taking a look at the dorms, and you were really, you know, looking at what life was going to be like there for 4 years. What was it going to be like when you're a New York City kid, and you were used to ordering Chinese food at 10:30 at night, and what was it going to be like at school if you couldn't do that? So you know, think about what your child's life is going to be like, and because the schools all have a lot to offer.
So we visited a few schools. My daughter and I and my wife visited a few schools, and I didn't find it very valuable. I don't think my daughter found it terribly valuable. My son, first time around, we visited one school. And I have to agree that after the fact, it's much more valuable to visit the schools where you narrow it down to a couple of choices. And I think just living through that whole process of the application and thinking about colleges for 8 months or whatever it takes is, gives you a different perspective on what questions are important to ask. And there's also, I think there's a point that is that I think we're all missing, is that there isn't one school that's going to be perfect for your kid. There's lots and lots of schools out there that your kids will go to or could go to and look back and say, I can't imagine myself anywhere else. So, you don't have to worry about making that giant mistake and going to the wrong place you should have gone to be, because chances are they'll do very well in a lot of different schools and really, really not imagine themselves elsewhere. So don't think that it's such a critical thing that you make the right choice. And it's even hard when you visit the schools after acceptance to really know the differences. And there's no way to ever know unless you transcript whether or not that's true. So I wouldn't get too serious about that. They find a place they really like. It seems to be a good match in terms of the academics they're interested in. There's a couple of other choices, which I think is important. It can't be you go to study A and only A. There have to be backups, because most kids actually change when they go to college. And so they have to be at least a school that has the alternative available. And it just goes.
Yeah, we visited around 25 colleges. From California to Northeast. Only the South one we didn't go to. So, but at the end, you only apply, 3 schools in the United States. The rest of them is other countries.
We visited a grand total of 7, and as I said before, we started February vacation, and I think it was very helpful. It was helpful because, at a minimum, after seeing, Aaron decided that he wanted a campus. He didn't want to be in a city. So, and first when we went to Harvard, he liked that. Then I took him to Princeton, and that was also valuable because that's where I went, and he refused to even consider it for the longest time because of that. And then when we went, he said 2 things. He said, "Gee, this is a really beautiful school, and Mom, I want a campus." And then we took him up to Cornell, and he said, I like this campus even better, it's bigger. He said, I really don't want a city school. I said, well, let's be sure about that before you rule out all the city schools. So I sent him on the Hunter trip. Hunter ran was it Kappa? That ran a bus trip. The Chinese American Parents Association ran a bus trip to Penn in June. And I sent him on that. I said, let's just make sure. And he hated it. And Penn's a great school. His dad went to Penn, so I knew at that point that's why I was spending more time on the city schools. So to that, in that respect, it was valuable.
And as Andrea's boys show, they got into schools that they didn't visit. So it's not necessarily a deal breaker, though there's buzz that some schools like WashU, I think you told me, Jessica, the buzz is, if you don't go, they don't let you in.
No, he got into a number of schools that we hadn't visited, and I was actually very grateful that he got into at least one that we had visited that was one of his top choices, because otherwise we would have been scrambling to go pretty much all over the Northeast looking at schools he hadn't seen.
Right. Okay, great. The interviews, everyone said that their children did interviews. Some of them were at college and some were here in New York with alum reps or reps, right? Okay, so is there anybody have a strong feeling about that?
Well, to the extent that you do go visit schools your junior year, your kids are not interviewing at that point, which means to interview on campus, you have to go back, which might not be feasible depending on where the school is and your true level of interest in the school, or if it's one of the schools that you think you're going to apply to. And what is also happening on campus is, I mean, Michelle interviewed on campus for one school, but many of them were in New York. Even on campus, many of the interviews today are done by students. So when you do your interview in New York, they're done by admissions reps who they send to New York. So they sit in hotel rooms and they have multiple interviews sequentially. So and also there are a number of schools will tell you whether their interviews are informational or whether they're evaluative. So it is a tremendous effort in some cases to go back a second time to all the schools that you would like to interview with. And it's even more difficult. It's the fall of your senior year. You have to keep up your grades, do all your applications, and in many cases, these kids are playing sports, or they're involved in theater, or they're musicians, or whatever. Their extracurricular activities don't stop. So it's just a timing difficulty.
My sons did interviews for some of their schools, not all of their schools. All the interviews were done in New York. They were alumni interviews. Many of the schools have a cutoff date. If you get your application in by a certain date, you'll get an interview. If you get your application in later, you may not get an interview. And because someone used to say your daughter was a procrastinator, every child is a procrastinator, I think, when it comes to this. Because both of my sons applied somewhere early decision, they waited until December, what was the date? No, December 15th, when the early decisions are given. They both got deferred from their early decision and then had 2 weeks to do the rest of those applications. They did not do much of anything other than the Common App prior to early decision acceptances or rejections. So they had 2 weeks, they missed a lot of the deadlines, and the 2 schools that they're going to, they do not interview them.
Interesting. Jessica, real quick, we're coming into the home stretch here.
It wasn't a choice. I mean, Princeton requires interviews, and he interviewed at Dartmouth and Duke because they called him and said, you're going to interview. Cornell offered an informational interview. But anyway, I asked Aaron if he found any of these interviews useful. I mean, I know from the Princeton side, because I interviewed for them, they want to meet you, but the Cornell was the other way around. Aaron said it was useful in the sense that it forced him to research those schools so that he could ask intelligent questions, but that also helped him learn something.
Yeah, my daughter got all the interviews too in Cafe in New York City, and then I asked her, oh, is it valuable, is it useful? And then she said, yeah, they pay my food, you know. And then she said, oh, I know about it.
Here's where I found interviews useful. My daughter doesn't present as well on paper as a typical Hunter student. The grade point average is probably not as strong as a lot of people would think one should be coming out of Hunter. But one-on-one, she shines. and she was able to charm people, and she ended up getting into schools that would have been a tremendous stretch for her, according to Naviance. And I think that she was able to sell herself, and I think the interviews really got her into probably 5 more schools than she would have gotten into.
Okay, the decision, the final decision. Maybe you could characterize what the ultimate process was, how many schools applied to, how many got in, were there disappointments you needed to help with, and what role did you have in helping make that final decision? You want to start?
Ben applied to 8 private schools and 2 state schools, as he suggested to me here. He got into all of the private schools except for 3. He was waitlisted on 1 and was declined from his 2 reach schools. He was very disappointed. One of his reach schools was Dartmouth, and it was his early decision choice. So he was deferred and then finally rejected. But he knew by the time that he was deferred that the chances of getting in accepted from the deferred list is pretty slim. When we look on Naviance, the percentages for many of those schools are low. But he still held out hope. But he got into his other schools. So he had lots of choices. And what he debated with, and I shared this with Karen the other night, and he debated whether he should be going to Northwestern, which was the higher ranked school according to U.S. News and World Report, versus Tufts was in his choice, but that was the 3rd, versus Lehigh, which seemed to have a program that he was really interested in. He mentioned camp with a criteria, and Lehigh has this campus feeling, and there was just lots of things about Lehigh that he liked and he really felt excited about. But in his mind, I'm this special student, I've been in Hunter, I've been this high achiever, I should go to the best school I could possibly go to, according to U.S. News and World Report. And in the end, he chose not to go to Northwestern. Part of it is because his brother is going to Northwestern and he claimed it first. But also in conversations, and this is where I really did play a major role, it was the conversation to say, what really is important to you? What are the things that you were attracted to at Lehigh and some of the other schools? And, you know, where is this decision really going to come down to? And he was able to finally say, not because I pushed him, but because he came to the realization it was better to be at a school where he had lots of the boxes checked, you know, off of that checklist, and where he felt the most comfortable and he thought was a nice fit for him. And he'll do well there versus the school that he might have done extremely well in Northwestern as well, and it was a great program, but didn't have all the boxes checked. And, you know, just because it was a higher ranked school, he realized that was not the most important thing. So I said this whole process for Ben in particular was a real growth and maturity experience. It was a journey, and I think for both of my kids, this whole process was really a journey. You start in 10th or 11th grade. A reason that you go back and see these schools again is because the child you were in 11th grade is not the same kid you are in senior year, and there's a lot of changes and realizations about who you are, what you want, what can interest you, and what's important. So
I think that's well put. It probably applies to all of our kids. But if the others of the panel have something quick you want to say, go ahead. This was about making the final decision in your role.
Well, for Aaron, it was easy because he had 3 top choices and he got into one of them. And that was it.
That's good. Donna?
Emily realized in her heart of hearts that Colorado really was what she wanted. She was never interested in Ivy League schools. You know, if it had a brand name, she really wasn't interested in it. She targeted well. She got into 16 out of 20 schools that she applied to. She only didn't get into one stretch. And when it came down to it, we did all the spreadsheets, and it really didn't make a difference because I looked into her eyes and I said, "What's in your heart, baby?" And that was it.
Peggy, your daughter was pretty firm throughout, right?
She did apply early decision to Johns Hopkins and was accepted, so we were done on December 15th. Which was having said that, 3 years earlier I spent, we found out there was a supplement from Middlebury on January 1st, which is the day it was due. you have to pay a lot of money to get something postmarked on January 1st. Because I am the ultimate procrastinator. It lives in my home too, I used to. But in terms of when she saw the school in April, and we made her go back, we all went back. My husband came in October as well. We were rolling our family, if you want to play early, both parents have to see it, just because we feel like you're making a commitment and you might end up there. And this time we made her stay over. I mean, we told her you have to stay over. She sat in another class. You have to make sure it's a place that you're comfortable with academically, but also socially. Do like the kids. And now it's October of senior year, 6 months after the first time she had seen it, and in the interim she had probably seen 15 schools. She came up with the same end result, but you got to make sure in the fall before you apply early. And my one recommendation would be, if you're considering early, make sure you're doing it for the right, your child is doing it for the right reasons. Not because statistically you have a better chance to get into that school, but because you really want to go to that school. Because if you get in, your child is going. And you want them to be thrilled when they find that out.
Great. I'm going to paraphrase two things and then ask one final question. We're not going to talk about financial aid because the PTA does a separate session on that. But merit aid is something that everybody can apply to. They do talk about that in the financial aid session too. But Donna, your daughter got offered tons of scholarships, right?
Which is hysterical because, as I said, my kid's grade point average is like a B+, A-. And she doesn't mind me saying that, it's okay. But she got lots of merit aid from all over the place, and we didn't expect it, and we didn't qualify for financial aid. Our business is on our tax return. We look wealthier than we are. So we didn't even file a FAFSA. But she got aid from just about all the schools, and nice amounts, really nice amounts. So I don't know what that's about.
Hunter students are generally in demand at a lot of schools.
And I think that's the point, is that when you're looking for aid, of any kind of aid, from the top schools, most of the IBs, they don't offer merit aid. They think that all of their students are qualified and they all would get aid if it was based on academics. When you're applying to schools where your student coming from Hunter and doing so well here with the reputation is going to be really sought after, that's where you get a lot of opportunity. For both of my sons, in the schools that were their safety schools, they were offered a lot of money, to the point where I had a school call me last week. Now, how far after the death, the May 1st deadline? And the call was from UConn, which is one of the schools that Ben applied to as a state school, so that he had a state school on his list. And we never even went to see it, but they called to say, has Ben made a decision? Yes, he has. But I'm calling to tell you we're going to offer him 50% scholarship for all 4 years. And I said, thank you, but he's made his decision. I didn't, I pretended he wasn't even in the house because, we wouldn't want to get into that conversation. And they said, okay, for some parents that really is a lot of money, and they go, oh wow, let us think about it. I said, no, it really is a lot of money. Believe me, it's a lot of money. But he had already made his decision. So, yeah.
And now, Jessica, you said you do have to apply for this, or you have to let them know you're interested. Is that right?
Well, there was some miscommunication in my house. Aaron wants to study international relations, and among the schools we looked at was Washington University in St. Louis. And I had been told that WashU has a lot of merit aid. He applied for a Danforth, he didn't get it, but there were still several, I think 4 other kinds of, at least, merit scholarships that you can get. I thought that if you just apply, you're considered for them. I was wrong about that, but I thought Aaron understood that one of the reasons we were looking at that school was the merit aid. However, I found out afterwards that he, in the process of submitting the application, decided he didn't feel like applying for the merit aid because it required additional essays. So if you are looking at a school for merit aid, make sure you communicate that to your child, otherwise you'll be surprised.
Great. And Peggy, I just wanted you to mention real quick your daughter's research opportunity, which I think more and more schools are offering.
So it just so happens that my husband went to an information session in October of his senior year. My daughter and I had gone to one in April, but we were doing something else at Johns Hopkins on our second visit. It was his first. And they mentioned a scholarship, a Woodrow Wilson Research Fellowship program in his information session. We knew nothing about it. But we went back home and we Googled it and we found out about it and we said to her, she looked at it, it's a research fellowship, you get $10,000 over the course of 4 years. They take 12 to 15 freshmen a year. And you can use the money any way you want. You have to write a grant proposal, which most 17-year-olds haven't done. But they were willing to send her a sample. So they sent her one, and she wrote one, and on April 1st, 5 months, or almost 5 months after she had gotten in, she got a letter saying she got this fellowship. And we wouldn't have known about it from our information session, but my husband happened to hear about it. So my advice is, look on the college websites, and I'm hoping at some point that there'll be some institutional memory here, because we have friends whose high schools tell their kids to apply for these fellowships, even only because it makes them look like they're interested in the college or the university. Like they're applying, not thinking they'll get it, but just to really support their application. We're not doing that here. Maybe because we don't have the information, but maybe over time we'll start to gain that information. So if you find something out, if you share it with the counseling department, maybe over time that will be collected. I promise, I will share that little bit of with the counseling department.
I do think it's a trend, so think about research opportunities even in the freshman year. Okay, last question. What was the one best thing you did for your child in this process? Do you think of it? Can you do?
Well, so I think one of the best things that I did was that when we went to visit, well, first of all, every time we went to visit a school, if we knew somebody who went there, if we knew somebody who knew somebody who went there, if we knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who went there, we reached out. So my daughter had lunch, and we ate on every campus, my daughter had lunch with people she never met. We told her to walk over to people in the cafeteria or the dining hall to talk to kids, not the tour guide, but just regular students. I think encouraging them to reach out is a really good thing. And the most important thing is I think it's great to ask questions on the tours. There definitely are some questions that will embarrass your kids. So you can formulate a question to get information. I found I could formulate a question to get information without my daughter knowing.
For Ben, because he was specifically interested in engineering, not every day that we chose to tour offered the engineering tour, and if we couldn't make that, I made sure that he got in front of somebody in the engineering department. And, I was not going to leave that up to him. He's not going to make that phone call or send that email. So we made sure, I made appointments for him at every school that we went to so that he got a special tour or talked to someone. And that helped him decide among the different types of engineering schools, what he saw, where he saw commonalities and things that he liked. So that was.
I kept a sense of humor about this with my kid because I was really freaked out about all this. But so just laugh with your kid and really have a good time with it. And to praise them when they're actually getting stuff done rather than telling them what they still need to do was really important. As I mentioned, my kid's a procrastinator. She grew so much through this process. She finished every single one of her college applications by November 15th. It was such a joy for her to watch her friends sweating it out on December 31st when she knew she had it done. So.
The only thing I can think of is I just let her drive it herself. I think she had to go where her heart took her, and my only role was really to sort of push her to meet the deadlines. And other than that, she needed to make the decision herself. And I'm a Cornell graduate and I actually work for Cornell, and if I said something to push her towards Cornell, it probably would have been a backfire. And so she ended up choosing Cornell on her own, literally no pressure from me, even though she jokes about it. So I think it doesn't work for every kid, but for Corey it worked well.
I would think if you're the first time go through the college process, especially for the parents, who doesn't study college here in the States, the best thing is to stop the process earlier and take the kids to the PTA meetings and the CAPA, CAPA meetings, whatever related to the college process. Just take the kids there and let them sit there and learn. And so they will get a lot of information from those meetings. Because this time, during my daughter's college process,
I had a personal family emergency, so I wasn't around with her. But then she, just because with all these meetings she went through, she knew what's going on, and so it's very helpful for those kids.
I have to say the best thing I did for my kid was to help him with the essays. And I have to say my younger son is in 8th grade, and he was applying to high schools at the time. So it was sort of like 2 New York City high schools by day, critique college essays by night for like 6 to 8 weeks. And I thought I was going to go nuts. But I really do think that was the best thing I did for him. As I said before, it wasn't something new. I've been doing this for him all along. But these kids, they think, they know their strengths, and if I say that they think that they're great, that's a good thing, but they don't understand that you could be the greatest thing since sliced bread, and if you don't put that out there, no one's going to know. And the fact is, colleges, as somebody I know said, they evaluate applications. They don't evaluate applicants. Most of them don't meet applicants. Many schools don't interview. And that's, so for all that, it was to say, what are you doing? Or does this topic work? You would ask me, does this topic work? Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. Again, what are you trying to say? What do you mean here? Those kinds of things. I think that was the best thing I did for him.
Great. Well, there you have it. Range of experiences. That's everybody's able to go. A lot of and also and everyone's pretty happy with where they're going, right? So remember the college guide that's on the school website, and attend all the meetings having to do with college, as Fiona said. And good luck to you all. Thank you very much.